Well, well, well. Good evening, beautiful. And I don't use that term loosely. You showed up tonight, which means either you're brave or you haven't been paying attention. Either way, welcome to the show. The curtain's already up, and the first thing we're going to do is something your little antagonists absolutely despise. Clarity. They swore you were harmless, adorable even, like a puppy in a thunderstorm. They swore you were simple to read, easy to shelve, impossible to take seriously. They swore. Oh, they swore. You'd never figure out how they moved, how they schemed, how they plotted, how they tried to stay 10 steps ahead of someone they considered 10 steps below. Hilarious, isn't it? How they kept talking, monologuing, really, like every mediocre villain who mistakes volume for victory. Yet somehow, you were the only one actually listening. Look who's squirming now. Look who suddenly wants to rewind the tape. Look who's pretending. Oh, and they are pretending. Trust me. That they didn't underestimate you so loudly. It echoed through every corner of their sad little conspiracy. The same ones who mocked you, currently losing sleep, tossing and turning over the delicious, inconvenient fact that you didn't shatter. You evolved. They expected your smile to mean surrender, not choreography. They thought your softness made you predictable. They thought your patience was a prop, a set piece, something decorative and dull. When they whispered, "You're too kind for this world," what they meant was, "You're too easy to puppet." Cute. Adorable, really. Because all that time you weren't fighting back. You were studying. All that time you weren't responding. You were composing. They assumed they were the puppeteers, but, heh. Now they're realizing the silence they giggled at was the overture before you brought down the whole theater. Smash that like button. Consider it your admission ticket to the only show in town that tells your side of the story. Anomaly. And yes, I'm calling you that without a shred of irony, which should terrify you. Thanks for actually showing up. Your presence here? That's not passive, that's tactical. Every scrap of support you toss in fuels the voice that speaks for you, not about you. Because this isn't just a video, it's a heist. It's a detailed inventory of everything you survived while they were busy forging fairy tales about your downfall. It's the documentation of the moment you rewrote the script so thoroughly, they forgot what act they were in. Let's talk about the atmosphere around you now. Ever notice it? That peculiar quiet in the room after you exit. Like the air itself is holding its breath. That delightful tension in their tone when your name slithers into conversation. That nervous laugh when someone tries to crack a joke about you, but can't quite disguise the tremor behind their teeth. They act fine. But the universe, oh, the universe is a terrible liar. There's a shiver around your victories, a flinch around your comebacks, a hush that screams they know exactly what they did, even if they'll gnaw their own tongues off before admitting it. And honestly, that's the funniest part. And I'm something of a connoisseur of comedy. They used to strut around like their footsteps were writing your destiny. Now they tiptoe, terrified you might catch them trying to edit the story they already ruined. Stop the noise. I've got a secret for you. Stop reliving the humiliation and start engineering your revenge. My 73-page guide, The Evolution of the Anomaly, is locked and loaded. Grab it in the description or pinned comment of this video. Keep that link open. Let's get back to the real meat of this. When they said you were too sensitive, what they really meant was, I didn't expect your spirit to survive the wreckage I orchestrated. When they said you were overreacting, What they really meant was, I'm petrified you'll finally act. When they said, you'll regret losing me, what they really meant was, I regret underestimating you so profoundly it may take me the rest of my pitiful little life to recover. Look who's scrambling for explanations. Look who's trying to reverse engineer moves you've already outgrown. Your metamorphosis didn't just humble them, it unmasked them. And isn't that just poetic? Don't pretend you didn't feel that shift inside yourself, too. You know the exact moment. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't loud. It was that one night you sat alone, replaying the whole wretched circus, and suddenly, click. Your tears dried in the middle of falling. Your trembling stopped in the middle of breaking. You woke up the next morning with the kind of clarity people chase for decades. That's when you became dangerous. That's when you grinned like a saint, knew precisely what you were capable of, and finally started directing the play like the villain they accused you of being. Remember the time you forgave someone just to preserve the peace, even though they never valued it. Remember the time you poured your last drop of energy into someone while they gave the best version of themselves to a complete stranger? Remember when you stayed loyal to people who couldn't even stay consistent? You didn't lose anything in those moments. They did. They lost access to someone the universe sculpted through pandemonium. They lost access to someone who can stroll through hurricanes wearing a grin because pain stopped being a punchline and became a prologue. They lost access to someone who loved them honestly while they were busy memorizing their own lies. And you know what makes this whole performance hit even harder? They told their friends you were emotional. They told their little circles you were obsessed. They painted you as porcelain so they could feel like granite. Meanwhile, here you are, alive, ascending, healing, plotting your encore, building your narrative with surgical precision while they're still repeating the same mistakes that tanked their last production. The universe, it turns out, has a wicked sense of humor. We have that in common. It let them think they won so they'd be spectacularly unprepared for the moment you walked back into the world utterly unrecognizable. Anomaly. You're not the same character they tried to demolish. You're the character the narrative was always building toward. The one who watched everything crumble, memorized where the cracks started, and reconstructed yourself in a way no adversary ever anticipated. They don't fear your kindness. They fear the fact that your kindness has teeth now. They don't fear your heart. They fear how your heart refuses to flatline. They don't fear your intelligence. They fear how you learned to bury it in plain sight until it was far, far too late for them to counter your next act. This is your moment. The reveal, the twist nobody scripted. The universe is done letting them perform roles they never earned. And you, Anomaly, are finally stepping into the spotlight they tried to brick over. You grinned like an angel, then directed the play like the devil, and now the whole stage belongs to you. What they called innocent was actually the first sign they were about to lose everything. Anomaly, let's get brutally honest about that grin of yours. The one they swore was cute, soft, sweet, harmless. The one they underestimated so catastrophically it deserves its own Wikipedia page. That grin wasn't decoration. It was a landmine buried under a flower bed. It was the quiet before their curtain call. And the funniest part? They still pretend they didn't see the warning signs, even though the universe practically painted them in fluorescent letters across the sky. They waltzed straight into their own catastrophe, smirking, convinced they held the strings. Look who's weeping now. They looked at your face and assumed the narrative. They thought your softness spelled surrender. They thought your calm spelled confusion. They thought your politeness spelled obedience. They convinced themselves that someone like you couldn't possibly be dangerous. But here's the twist they never rehearsed for. The most dangerous people on this gloriously rotten planet are the ones who don't need to announce it. The ones who smile while scheming. The ones who listen instead of snarling. The ones who let the enemy feel comfortable just long enough to expose every last weakness they were hiding behind those pitiful little grins of false confidence. When they laughed at that grin, they were laughing at their own eulogy. They didn't grasp that the sweetest expressions often belong to the quietest directors. They couldn't fathom that your warmth didn't make you naive. It made you patient. You weren't losing. You were observing. You weren't behind. You were disguising your lead. And the entire time they thought they were teaching you lessons. You were memorizing their choreography, their habits, their blind spots, their tells. You watched how they pivot, how they fib, how they fracture under the slightest pressure. You learned their entire script, including the pages they thought they'd shredded. And now, look at the scoreboard. Who's still standing? Who's still rising? Who's still becoming a delightful little problem no matter how many times they tried to shatter you? The anomaly, naturally? Because you didn't fight them with fangs and frenzy. You fought them with finesse. You weaponized quiet. You let their ego overheat until it melted their own master plan from the inside out. Let's talk about the moment they realized your grin wasn't the liability they'd assumed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't theatrical. Well, not their kind of theatrical. It was subtle. A shift in their eyes when they saw you weren't devastated like they'd planned. A quiver in their voice when they noticed you stopped reacting. A hesitation when they realized they no longer controlled your emotions. That's when the panic kicked in. Because nothing scares an enemy more than losing the version of you they depended on. Ever notice how they suddenly got polite? How their jokes softened, their jabs became vague, how they started asking questions they'd never bothered with before? That wasn't concern. That was fear wearing a costume called curiosity. They wanted to know how much you knew. They wanted to know how far ahead you were thinking. They wanted to know whether you decoded them entirely. Spoiler, you did. And trust me, they felt it. That tiny flicker of uh-oh. That exquisite instant where they realized the stage rotated and you weren't the understudy they'd dismissed. You were the director, the one who sees the whole production, the one who's already 5 scenes ahead. The one who can grin while everything around them combusts because you finally learned something they never expected you to learn. You don't have to destroy someone loudly to win. You only have to stop giving them access. What terrified them wasn't your rage. It was the moment you became unreadable. Anomaly, let's press a truth you might be pondering silently right now. Why did they underestimate you so spectacularly? Why didn't they see the real you? Why did they treat you like background scenery while you were building yourself into the main event? Because people like them only recognize 2 species of power, the loud kind and the fake kind. They were accustomed to manipulators who shout to seem strong. They were accustomed to liars who performed confidence like bad dinner theater. They were accustomed to cowards who build thrones out of fog and mirrors. But you were different. You didn't do theatrics. Well, not the obvious kind. You didn't beg. You didn't broadcast. Your power was internal, quiet, and steady as a ticking clock in an empty room, and quiet power terrifies loud frauds. They weren't scared when you loved them. They were scared when you stopped needing them. They weren't scared when you cried. They were scared when you stopped explaining yourself. They weren't scared when they broke you. They were scared when you rebuilt yourself without asking for their help. You became unpredictable, untouchable, unreadable. You became a threat wrapped in a smile, and there's nothing in their playbook for that. Funny how they bragged about beating you while unknowingly performing in a play you wrote. Anomaly, let's rip the curtain off this next delicious truth, because it's time to expose the part of you they were never prepared to face. They strutted around thinking they were competing against an amateur, as if you were some wide-eyed understudy stumbling onto a stage you didn't belong on. They mistook your humility for incompetence. They confused your silence with bewilderment. They saw your kindness and stamped it ignorance. The whole time, you were the architect behind the mask. Watching them pirouette on strings they didn't even know you were pulling. What they called innocence was brilliance choosing not to brag. Picture this. An enemy marches into the arena, chest puffed, absolutely convinced they're about to teach you a lesson. They smirk. They monologue. Oh, they love a monologue. They flex like a B-movie antagonist who forgot they're not the lead. Meanwhile, you're sitting there, still as a scalpel on a tray, not reacting, not revealing a thing, measuring every step they take like a demolitions expert, deciding which wire to snip. That's the moment the universe took notes. Because you outmaneuvered them without ever raising your voice, you'd weaponized your own underestimation. That's the sort of genius they will never recover from. You let them think you didn't understand the performance. You let them believe you were too gentle for ruthless decisions. You let them assume your morals were obstacles instead of instruments. And the instant they fell for their own assumptions, the production belonged to you. Their biggest blunder wasn't underestimating you. It was assuming you weren't watching. What dismantled them wasn't cruelty. It was precision. While they were gossiping about their little triumphs, you were already forecasting their next 10 fumbles. While they celebrated crumbs, you were engineering the collapse of their entire charade. They bragged about capturing a bit player, never noticing you'd rigged the whole theater around them. They were so drunk on ego, they never questioned how easy every victory felt. The whole time, you were guiding them exactly where you needed them to go. That's mastery, anomaly. Here's the truth your mind whispers in quieter moments. Did I really orchestrate it that well? Was I actually the one in control? Yes, you were. Because real power doesn't arrive with pyrotechnics. Real power moves in patterns so subtle, the enemy mistakes them for coincidence. Your brilliance wasn't loud enough for their ego to detect, so they confused mastery with meekness. That's how you stayed hidden long enough to win. Now, you ever heard of a poisoned well? Not literally, obviously. I'm theatrical, not homicidal. Well, not today. While they were sharpening swords and swinging wildly, trying to look intimidating, you were salting the earth they planned to build on. You weren't just learning the terrain, you were rewriting the map. That's what happens when someone underestimates a thinker. They hand over their entire blueprint and don't notice until the building's already on fire. You know what tickles me even more? They called you too forgiving, too patient, too emotional, as if those were flaws. But your patience was a snare, your forgiveness was a litmus test, your emotions were a cipher, You learned exactly who they were by watching how they handled your softness. And once you'd mapped the architecture of their hollow little hearts, you didn't need revenge. Their own decisions were punishment enough. Let's drop a story on them. Remember that moment from your past where someone laughed at your kindness, treated it like a weakness, used your compassion as a doorway to disrespect you. They thought they'd scored a victory, but if you look at them now, life didn't exactly reward that behavior, did it? Their relationships crumble, their credibility dissolves, their reputation shrinks like cheap fabric in hot water. Meanwhile, you rise, slowly, steadily, relentlessly. That grin they once dismissed, it's the same grin that haunts them now, because it represents the moment they lost the one person they could never replace. You didn't lose your power by being soft. You discovered it. You understood that real power doesn't rush. Real power waits for the perfect moment to reveal itself. And that smile, it was your mask, your armor, your backstage pass into their arrogance. What you destroyed wasn't their ego. It was their illusion of control. When you walked away with that same gentle grin they misinterpreted, you didn't exit the stage. You ended the show. You didn't slam doors. You didn't scream. You didn't argue. You closed the act with elegance, and that's the part that wrecked them. They expected chaos. You gave them silence. They expected tears. You gave them clarity. They expected begging. You gave them nothing, and nothing was the loudest thing you ever gave. They'll replay that grin forever, the one they brushed off, the one they didn't respect, the one that concealed the mind that dismantled their entire strategy. They'll remember it as the moment the stage rotated, the moment the extra they mocked became the director they feared, the moment the angel face they underestimated started running the show like the devil they never saw coming. That grin didn't topple empires. It toppled illusions. It toppled lies. It toppled their counterfeit power. And now the only empire still standing is yours. The one you built from the wreckage they so generously gifted you. Anomaly. Before we go any further, I need you locked in with the same precision you used when you grinned sweetly while plotting 10 scenes ahead. If you're truly stepping into the version of yourself who smiles like an angel and directs the play like the devil, show it. Grab your book from the comments, your silent signature, your mark on the marquee, your way of saying, I see the performance now, and I'm not blinking. Hit that like button, subscribe, and fortify the force that's been speaking your truth louder than anyone ever dared. This isn't support. It's stagecraft. This is how you back the message that exposes what they buried and fuels the story that finally gives you your edge. And now, Anomaly. Tighten your grip on this moment, because we're about to dismantle the entire production, act by act. If you're truly who I think you are, you'll feel that tug in your chest. That strange instinct telling you not to leave, not to look away. Because something in these words is unlocking pieces of you that were never meant to stay buried. Stay with me, stay sharp, stay dangerous.